I had the privilege of meeting a young man in band, played the saxophone, I played the drums. He played his better than I played mine. His name was Tommy. Today he's Dr. Thomas Martinez. And Tommy is a professor at Pepperdine University in psychology, teaching both graduate and undergraduate. And he's also a survivor of polio. And I'll let him tell his story, Dr. Thomas Martinez.
A little bit more publicly about my personal experience. Normally as a professor I teach and I talk to a lot of students about psychology and working with folks and how to be good therapists, and that's kind of my job, and that's what I do as a professor at Pepperdine. But I think also as I've done different experiences, especially one of my experiences working with the Museum of Tolerance, and listening to the survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust, and thinking more lately a lot of what I've been experiencing and listening to about immunizations, about vaccinations, about some of the debate about whether even we should be doing this and the dangers and risks. And so I've kind of really reflected on the fact that people have forgotten a lot of the experiences of my life and a lot of the experiences of others who I remember. And so I don't necessarily think of myself as a survivor of polio. I mean, primarily because I still have polio. And so if you think about myself, the disease I have now is called post-polio syndrome. And so polio never leaves you. And so people like me learn to live with the problems that I have. And as you probably notice, I have a crutch and braces. And that's something I've always lived with and started living with when I was 3 years of age. I actually got polio when I was 1 year of age in the 1950s. And in doing some research, I found that during that year, actually 33,000 people contacted polio. But it was one of the last years where that many people actually got polio in our country, primarily because if you think about the Salk vaccination, most of you hopefully remember that, the sugar cubes and taking this stuff, but the politics of the day were such that they really didn't make that available till 1954. And that's when actually Jonas Salk gave it to his own family first before he gave it to other people. And that changed the world, obviously, to the point where I think in 2003, I think in 1974 there was about 7 cases in America. And in 2003 there were about 700 cases throughout the world, in India, Pakistan, and other parts of the world. And even today we see that continuing. So the whole possibility of eliminating this disease throughout the world is something that I'd love to see in my lifetime. And I think this is where the Rotary right now and their commitment to really contributing to helping to really effectively change this makes a big difference. A couple things just in terms of my story, because I throw this out because I also work with people who have disabilities, who've been injured, you know, growing old like myself, and maybe many of you start experiencing these things as deterioration and things. And I always ask this question of people like yourself: if I were to ask you, if God were to say you have the gift of long life, but one part of your body you'd have to give up, you'd have to not allow, not to have function anymore, which part of your body would you be willing yourself to give up to live longer? Think about that for a minute. Anybody have an answer? Yeah. Yeah, there. Yeah, that's usually what I get. The pinky, maybe. Anybody else? What part of your body? Anybody? It's interesting because when you think about that, it's like, yeah, the pinky kind of, well, maybe, but you know, if you think about your pinky, that could come in handy too. So the point is, though, obviously, there's a lot of things in our life that we kind of count on, but you know, we'd hate to lose. Well, I didn't have a choice of losing my inability to walk. That happened when I was 1 year of age. I became sick. I had a flu. Nobody knew at that point what was going on. The fear was it was polio, but nobody knew. People like me were quarantined. We were put into isolation with other children, alone, so that other people wouldn't be contagious, would not receive what we had, because nobody knew what polio really was, even in the 50s, even though polio historically has always been around as infantile paralysis. But it really hadn't taken the effect until the early 1900s, when literally in the summertime, polio was like a plague to our nation. And every summer, children would become infected, and old people, thousands. And we'd hide children so that they wouldn't be able to be with each other. We hid people away so they wouldn't be contagious. And people like me were feared because I could maybe give other people, especially children, polio. So it was interesting to think about this experience because obviously my family didn't know what was going on, and we had to rely on the care of others. I was taken care of by the county hospital, Los Angeles County Hospital, Casa Colina Hospital, and then finally Los Angeles Orthopedic Hospital. Thank God they took care of us. They took care of me all my life. Most of my life I've experienced medical problems, surgeries, different efforts. Some of the surgeries were kind of quack surgeries. We found out later they really didn't do much, but people were well-meaning. I had certain experiences in my life that I think back on now. I've kind of forgotten, but then remember, and so those are the kind of things I like to share. For example, I remember somebody I grew up with in a hospital. I don't know his name, but he was one of my best friends, but he lived in literally in an iron lung. And I don't know if you remember what an iron lung was, but it was just a fascinating machine that allowed someone to actually live with polio. Because in my days, even though I couldn't walk, I was one of the lucky ones. People generally died because they couldn't breathe with polio. But other people could be kept alive with an iron lung. And so this young man would live in an iron lung, and I would visit him. And that would allow him to breathe. It was like actually a beer can, at least for me, it looked like a beer can from your neck onto your waist. It would push air through your stomach. And as long as that machine was working, he was alive. But if the machine stopped working, he would die. And we all kind of knew that, kind of wondering what would that be about. But he would also show me, in a sense, what it was like to live with what you had, because I would watch him and his only movement was with his toes and with his mirrors and his paints and his arts and crafts. He literally would paint little murals with his toes and sell them to make some money for himself, or jewelry that he would sell. And so it kind of taught me a little bit about the fact that I was one of the lucky ones. At least I could walk, at least I could use crutches, at least I could be mobile. I didn't have to stay locked up. And so when I say to you, what would you be willing to lose? It's kind of interesting because on the other side of it would be, what would you not be willing to lose? What could you, if you lost something, some function in your body, would you say, I don't want to live anymore? I can't do this anymore. I can't function anymore. If you think about it, a lot of people say, oh, my eyesight, my hearing. I don't know about you. As I get older, my hearing's going. I can barely smell anything. I think that's a blessing, but so a lot of these things are going anyway. But when you think about it, what would you not be willing to lose? As a psychologist, what I've learned in my lifetime, that the hardest thing to think about losing, especially for people, and most of us don't think about that, is our minds, our brains, our memories. If you lose that, you've lost everything. And so as a psychologist, I'm very, very in tune with that. And so it's kind of, to me at least, I've been one of the luckier ones to survive this whole disease because I remember. And so as a witness to this, and one of the last of the survivors, because most of the people now have died away, I'm one of the last of the youngers to have gotten the disease. So I'm one of the last people still alive to remember what it was like. So it's kind of interesting to me as I speak out about it because I try to tell people, this can happen again if we stop using vaccinations. If we stop vaccinating our children, if we don't really educate ourselves in the world, these diseases can return. This was like the last plague of America that people don't really remember. And that's fine, because we don't have to suffer that anymore every summer. But it's important to appreciate the fact that without people like yourself, without people who cared and contributed, made an effort to really make a difference in our life, I think those are the things that I'm grateful for now, looking back on it. A lot of the things you think, well, why did they do these things to me, and why was I treated this way? But, I think at the same time, I think everyone who helped me really had great intentions and well-meaning interests in the benefit of taking care of me and and this disability and this illness, it was very unknown. So I would encourage you, especially right now, even today, to not take it for granted. It's fun to do this and gain money, but I think, as you know, the importance of what you're doing here and the contributions that you're making do make a difference. And to people like myself, you know, who now can kind of go back and say thank you and also kind of hopefully contribute back. Part of what I do now is work with people who have mental health problems and mental illnesses and people who can't afford mental health care. So my way of giving back to my community is also a way of thanking people. So I also wanted to thank you today and encourage you to continue to do what you can, because I do think even though this disease is gone in our country, the reality is it still exists in the world, and we can do something to change it. Okay? Thank you very much.